All right, we're officially live, and so welcome everyone. Welcome to the Pouch versus politics over coffee. And now, having said that, I will remove the Pouch logo from the video out of courtesy. Actually, oh no, it's accidentally in the middle of the page. Oh, it's accidentally gotten really big. Oh no. Okay. Okay.
Classic courtesy. And
did you flying start?
Have you shared the link with the gentleman?
No, I don't really have a link to share.
Okay.
I don't really know how that works. It's more just if you want to.
Okay.
Yeah, we're live. Yeah.
We're live.
If you want to share the Facebook post or something like that, then you can do that. That's a
Can
fancy
we also
thing.
synchronize our recordings and individually press record on our local machines?
Already done it. Sorry.
Done. That's all right. It'll be someone's fun job to edit that later on. Yes. So welcome everyone to this crossover episode. It's an amazing crossover episode. It's been months in the making, and we are on the top of your screen. You will see myself in my jacket and Jake Farwarton, me, Greg Savage, and Jake Farwarton in his jacket. We are from the Pouch the Podcast. How are you, Jake?
Oh, great. My jacket's great. My microphone's great. My hair is not great, but my mustache, it's great.
I like that. I don't mind the idea of a breakdown of each individual part of the body when someone asks you how you are.
My toes, Greg, they're pretty great.
To the bottom of your screen is Gareth Strice-Demanis.
Oh, well done.
I didn't even look it up.
Very good.
I had a moment where I was like, "Oh, geez, am I going to get this right?"
Okay.
And beside him is Ollie Oliver Kuroy.
Kuri.
Kuri.
I think this is a proud tradition. We should pronounce my name differently every time.
Yeah, absolutely. Oliver Smith down the bottom there, and they are from the podcast, the Politics Over Coffee podcast. How are you, boys?
Very good. Very good. Been looking forward to it. Been looking forward to this for a while, so it's great. My toes are also fantastic, so
work your way up.
Yes.
Excellent. That's really good to hear. Now, the purpose of this conversation is so that Jake and I can get our concerns about the US election out in the open.
And you chose to talk to us, huh?
And we chose to talk to you about it. Now, this is no coincidence that the US go to the polls or have been going to the polls for a little while, but officially the election is on Tuesday their time, I think. Is that right?
Yes.
Yep.
And you guys are infinitely more knowledgeable than we are on this topic. So we appreciate you guys reaching out to have a conversation with us about this. Our podcast focuses on purely Australian news and politics. We sort of branch out a little bit into news these days. But you guys have several versions of your show. You have the sort of fortnightly one, which focuses on Australian sort of stuff. And then you have a worldwide sort of flex, don't you?
It is a flex. That's what it is. It definitely is a flex. Yes, yeah. So we bounce pretty much between 1 week it's Australian and US politics. The next week is we just pick a random spot in the world. I think recently we've talked about Eritrea and Ethiopia and other places, and then we just go back and forth like that throughout the whole year. And then come December, we both fall over completely exhausted. So yeah, it's awesome. It's fun. It's great. You learn a lot about what's going on in the world, and you just learn how much BS is happening in the world and how much good stuff is happening in the world as well. So,
what are the good things? Tell us a good thing.
Melbourne just came out of lockdown.
Time to get on the beers.
Congratulations! Did you get on the beers?
No, beer's making me horribly ill, but I got on the wine, and the scotch as well. So, yes. It's been awesome.
What about you, Ollie? You've got the same background you had when we last spoke, so I'm a bit worried. Is that you okay?
Yeah, no, I'm good. I had my first draft beer at the pub on Friday night. I had a pint, and it was the nectar of the gods, is what it was.
Were you allowed to be close to other patrons at the pub?
Yes,
what are the rules that govern pubitude?
There's still distancing.
Yep.
So the tables are set apart, and outdoor has different rules to indoors. But generally speaking, I thought the pub had done a really good job of making a little atmosphere. Given everyone has to be spread out, it's a little bit difficult. But it was look, it was great. It was fantastic to be out and about. I was a little bit worried it was going to be a bit anxiety-inducing being around other people for the first time in months, but no, it was fantastic. It was really good.
Like if you stay home for like 2 or 3 days by yourself, and you sort of talk to a human being, you sort of go up to the shop and you buy a juice or something, and you speak to them, you're just like, you can't function.
That's me generally, but yes, absolutely.
yeah, it's even worse, which is terrible, isn't it? All right, well let's get down to the nitty gritty. Are you guys ready to get down to the proverbial nitty gritty of our run sheet?
Let's do it,
as they call it. All right, so now the pandemic is officially over.
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
In the US, which is great.
That was a slight problem there for a while. I'm glad they've finished it up.
Given that earlier on in the week they recorded the most daily infections that in the US that they had recorded to date,
95,000. Yep.
Yes, it's really good to know that both President Donald Trump and his son have been touting the fact that both. Firstly, Donald Trump has listed the ending, the completion of the pandemic, the winning, if you like, of the successful negotiation, if you like, of the pandemic as one of his accomplishments of his presidency. And Don Jr. went on, I think it was Fox News, fairly late in the week, and speaking to one of the commentators on there. He said that deaths were, are there really any deaths anymore? The deaths are almost zero. They're so close to zero. He was saying on a day where almost 1,000 people died. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. 1,000 people.
Almost zero. Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's closer to zero than say like 20 million, but
yeah,
it's still,
true. Look, exactly. Factually accurate analysis.
Yeah, that is a factually accurate analysis, actually.
Tell us what your thoughts are about the fact that, like, I suppose one of the things that I've heard is that, is that it's really not up to Donald Trump, that we shouldn't be putting too much emphasis on the fact that Donald Trump is a murderer or callous or anything like that it's really about the states. So tell us what your thought is about breaking down that idea of that it's the liberal states in America who have the problems, and it's not the Republican states who have the problems.
Okay, so first of all, COVID is running rampant through red and blue states.
Okay.
There's no real discerning. It's a virus. It doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care if you're Democrat or Republican. The whole liberal run states are worse than the red states. It's just a pure talking point. That's it. You look at it's running rampant through the Midwest at the moment. Florida at the moment is like, it's. If you look at the polling at the moment, Florida Trump's could be Biden's, and it's running rampant through Florida. It's running rampant through Texas, which is a traditionally red state. It doesn't really, it doesn't matter, where you're from. I've said this before on the podcast. I don't agree with the analysis that Trump is responsible for every single death. It's a virus. It was coming into the country anyway. But you look at statistics and how he didn't respond to it, how he talked down the virus, how he knew the virus was as deadly as it is, and then talked it down throughout the first quarter of this year. And he's responsible for roughly around about something like 60,000 extra deaths. You still were going to have huge numbers. In a country that had 350 million people, you're going to have a lot of deaths. That you just couldn't avoid that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think also he made things like wearing masks. So he spent a tremendous amount of time undermining the science, undermining the learned individuals that the public health officials that we really should be, that the population should be trusting in. He made a concerted effort to undermine them. Secondary to that, he made a political issue out of things like, social distancing, out of things like, possibly more importantly, masks.
Mm-hmm.
And as a consequence, that became something that both his base took up, and instead, rather obnoxiously, in some cases violently reacting towards, taking people's masks off if they were in public. Look, there was a lot of action there, and I use that term specifically. There was a lot of action that Donald Trump took in order to make the coronavirus situation significantly worse. Yeah. And I do also want to point out, we in Australia, we take a lot of our constitutional wording from countries like the US because they did it so well this time. They didn't have any other amendments. No, we did take a lot of wording from the US Constitution. And important, there are words around essentially when cross state boundaries. That's when the federal government needs to or should, certainly from a constitutional perspective, that's when they can take action. When a crisis, when an issue, when a pandemic crosses state boundaries or is in multiple states, that is when the federal government should be taking action, or at the very least, leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you get a country like the United States that has such a high emphasis on state individualism. You're going to get some widely divergent approaches to how you're going to tackle a virus. But the federal government acts sort of like an umbrella. It has to be that overarching guiding force that says we're going to go in this direction. The simple fact that Dr. Fauci said about 2 weeks ago, we're going to hit around about, or maybe a month ago, we're going to hit about 1,000 cases a day. 100,000 cases a day. And now we're at 95,000 cases a day. He knows what he's talking about. You should be listening to the guy that's had such consistent expertise and knowledge and has been around so many different administrations. He's not political. He's as apolitical as a health expert is going to get. They should be listening to him. He knows what he's talking about. But as is the Trumpian way, any kind of voice of authority that isn't him, he's going to run down. And this is what recently he came out and said he called Dr. Fauci an idiot, in a call to governors. So it's just it's unfortunate, but it's also a very typical Trump response that he's going to downplay the whole thing. He's going to make it about himself. He's going to run down experts, and it's disappointing that it turned out to be such a typical thing.
Ollie, what do you think? About Biden? What do you think he's going to bring to the table that Trump won't at this stage of the game?
Policy.
Hang on, let me write that down.
I don't. And look, that sounds glib, but really policy. What we've seen from the Trump administration has been an almost complete lack of actual policy. So even things you're discussing, the gap between the federal government's response and state responses, and where should the federal government have been active. Instances such as procurement, having different states bidding against one another, driving up the price of masks when the federal government could otherwise have negotiated the entire contract. The US federal government is one of the largest suppliers, purchasers of goods in the world. That's about as strong a negotiating position as you could possibly have. And instead they left the procurement of universal items like masks and whatever else to the states. I thought that was a really basic policy failure. But I think that Biden has genuine policies and plans that already exist is a huge divergence from what we've seen from the White House, which has been much more haphazard in their approach to, even setting aside the lack of policy, just in the way that they speak to the pandemic, they speak to this emergency, has seesawed all over the place, much as President Trump seesaws about a lot of things. Have I answered your question about what I think Biden would do differently?
Yeah, I suppose that that's the thing, right? It's so far late in the game. Boris Johnson, an hour before we had our conversation, announced that they're going back into lockdown for a month. Do we think that Biden is going to take a similar approach? Because that's sort of, that's the economic argument that's sort of really playing into Republicans' hands at the moment, that they're saying, well, they want to shut the thing down for a pandemic that's not even really that big of a deal.
Oh, you had local anti-lockdown protests at the start of the pandemic. Can you imagine if the federal government comes in and says we're going to mandate masks, we're going to mandate a nationwide lockdown?
Yeah, they can't do it.
That'd be anarchy in the streets.
Yeah.
I think that's the reality of the situation, but I don't think that they have the constitutional prerogative. I don't think they have the power to enforce that sort of thing on states. They could.
Yeah.
Discussing the Biden side, you could say, well, the Biden administration might say, we will support any state that voluntarily institutes a lockdown, whether it's in a city area, whether it's a district, or whether it's a state, or whether it's whatever.
And Biden talked to that in his town hall by himself, where he said, it's very difficult. He pulled out a mask and said, well, we're gonna encourage everybody to make these mandatory. And that's him acknowledging that, you're absolutely right, Ollie. They probably lack the authority to actually mandate that federally. So
but there are ways. You don't necessarily need to go for the stick approach. You can absolutely go for a carrot approach. Which I always prefer to go to the economic argument.
Pay people to wear masks. I like that idea, Jake. That's great.
There are stimulus measures that have been. There are stimulus measures that have been negotiated but not passed, or at least the funding for them haven't been passed. One of the first measures of a incoming Biden presidency could just be to say, we will happily pass on this stimulus measure to all states that make the scientifically appropriate decision to either mandate or encourage mask use, and perhaps again the softer approach might work better with a Biden presidency to say just we encourage states to take this up, and as a direct measure we will ensure that the stimulus measure goes out as quickly as possible to the people within your states. That's maybe one way to do it, but you've also I haven't seen any announcements around Regeneron becoming completely accessible to all human beings in the United States, despite what President Trump said coming out of his immunity-raising illness for COVID. He said essentially he held a doorstop interview or a helicopter stop interview where essentially he said, look, I feel great. I feel better than I ever have. This is one of the best things to ever happen to me. And the drug that did it for me, Regeneron, I'm going to make it available to everyone. I think then he saw the price tag and recognized that, as a president, as someone who, it was just so disheartening to see the president talk about how great the medical care was, although, absolutely it was going to be great because he's the president of the United States. Not every human being has access to that same level of care. And I think he, unfortunately, being the narcissist that he is, I think he took the assumption that everybody else in America had exactly same access to exactly the same drugs, to the same insurance schemes, et cetera, et cetera. It was such an interesting thing when you had another world leader, Boris Johnson, got it and understood it. He understood it. He completely understood what happens both to the body. Like he was intubated, Boris Johnson. He understood what happens to the body. He understood the crisis. But again, the UK has universal healthcare essentially, and the US does not.
Socialist healthcare, you mean, Jake?
Socialized healthcare, you might. It's unfortunate that Trump, there were two outcomes from him getting coronavirus. There was the good outcome, and then there was the one where he survived and talked about. Sorry about that. And then there was the outcome. And then there was the outcome where he talked about his experience, and he didn't seem to learn anything from it. Just hooked up the great drugs that America has access to.
Yeah, and made it all about how he overcame the Chinese virus, how he is an Ubermensch, basically. He is the superior person that was able to defeat this mighty virus. Okay, cool. Learn from that experience. Now, go and help everybody else, as the president should. No, it's all about him and the narcissism.
Yeah, learning from mistakes is not a forte, is it?
Sorry?
Learning from his mistakes is not really a forte.
No, not at all.
He doesn't make mistakes, Greg. How would he know how to learn from that?
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right. So, well, you're right. Like, speaking of defeat, right? So you've got the idea that, I mean, if I suppose, just a side question, if Donald Trump is so bad, shouldn't have the Democrats have been able to easily find someone who could just squash him like a bug? Like, what is happening with that? Why is it not so easy to just eliminate Trump?
Well, first of all, I think you're assuming that the Democrats are far more organized than they actually are.
Yeah, I
So,
probably am.
which is, I mean, I know we're going to talk about the polling later on, but I mean, Biden, in regards to polling, is squashing Trump fairly consistently, especially in the national poll. Maybe it's a lot closer in the swing states. So the Electoral College is not a whitewash in Biden's favor by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
But I mean, as Ollie and I spoke about on the podcast a couple of times, the Democrats have found their most politically safe person. This is Uncle Biden. He's safe, he's calm, he's measured, he's rational in comparison to Trump. All his faults and flaws over the 47 years that he's been in politics pale in comparison to Trump. Trump is this monster that has created Biden got accused of sexual assault. Okay, that's horrible. Compared to the 25 people that have accused Trump over the decades of sexual assault, it's nothing in comparison. The nepotism of the Hunter Biden story pales in comparison to what's happening in the White House at the moment. So I don't think there's anybody in the Democrats who are politically palatable enough to become the nominee. I mean, you can't have a Bernie Sanders. It would just be capitalism versus socialism.
Yeah.
He's just not politically viable in that capacity. He's great for an agent of change. He's great for somebody who's going to push the Democrats towards these policies and towards these, broader left-wing ideas. But he wouldn't be a great candidate. So I think they've picked the best person they have. That's what it comes down to. And I'm not a massive fan of Joe Biden. I'm a massive fan of moments of Joe Biden. I've talked about a couple of times him disassembling Paul Ryan in the 2012 VP debate. I love that debate. It was just watching someone be taken apart live on air, and Ryan he didn't know what was going on. But Biden in 47 years has a lot of flaws, has a lot of mistakes. But in comparison to what we have now in the White House, I don't know. Ollie, what do you think? Sorry, I know I'm hogging the mic at the moment. I'm sorry. Ollie, what do you think?
No, we'd already flagged that I was going to spend at least 4 hours of the podcast talking about polls, so I was just biding my time.
So that's right. What about the argument, Ollie, that this is sort of like a covert operation by the Democrats to get Kamala Harris into office? That they know that Kamala Harris isn't palatable, which I think is a great word, Gareth.
Thank you. I made it myself.
That at least. That at least Biden is palatable in the sense that he's not extreme, right? That's sort of what they're going for, and that this is a coup by the left-leaning, the far left of the Democratic Party to get Kamala Harris in there to get their socialist agendas across.
Oh, I think that's rubbish.
Okay, well, good. We'll wrap it up.
Just sort of dispatch that comment. I think Biden was the selection that recognized the electoral math, which Gareth mentioned before, and we can probably touch on more in the polling section. But the 35% of likely voters in the US don't care what Donald Trump does or doesn't do or says or doesn't say. It doesn't matter.
Yeah,
they're going to vote for Donald Trump. So all you're dealing with is the next marginal bracket of people who are prepared to vote or not vote. And something that I think is difficult for Australians particularly to grapple with, and I'm repeating myself here from something we discussed on the Politics Over Coffee show last week, is that we come from a place where there is mandatory voting in effect, which means that the regulators are incentivized to make it as easy as possible to vote, and the intent in the US is not that.
No.
It is, you aren't obliged to provide any ease of access. You aren't obliged to, you won't suffer the consequences if there are huge lines. There's no quid pro quo there. There's no payback for making it difficult to vote in places or making it easy to vote in other places or disproportionately advantaging some group versus another. In Australia, you get fined if you don't vote. And if you can show or imagine if one of the news channels got a hold of it being really difficult to vote somewhere in an electorate, they'd be, tarred and feathered and led through the streets.
Yeah.
And it's a very different scenario. So you have to talk about, registered voters and likely voters, and a third of eligible American voters aren't going to vote.
And you have to register with a party there, don't you?
You don't have to. There's certainly undecided. 80% of early ballots are unaffiliated
Right.
voters.
Okay. So when you go and register to vote, you sort of have to tick a box which says which party or non-party you're affiliated with.
Candidate.
Yeah, right.
You can. If you are a member, then you can. It depends.
Right,
Yeah.
I see. Okay. All right. Well, that's
like
very
most things. There's no hard
no.
fast thing.
Right across there is one consistency. It's that it's inconsistent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's and like you said, right, coming from Australia, you sort of that's the rabbit hole you go down because our voting system is I suppose it's surprisingly simple compared to the American system. So you sort of come from here and you go, well, this person is the most popular according to the polls, therefore they are the leader of the party, or like you have your candidates and stuff. But that's sort of generally how it goes. And then you get to America and you're like, oh. So you don't even have to vote. No, you don't even have to vote. Okay, and then what happens when you do? Well, the most popular person certainly doesn't get in. That's for sure.
Yeah, it is complicated. I do sort of vacillate between whether it was complicated by design. Just there was a whole bunch of decisions that were made early on in order to make it as simple as possible in a time where in a time where the result of an election took multiple weeks in order to congregate the decision of the election from each different states to a point where you could actually know who was actually elected, i.e. horse and carriage days, and just it simply has not moved on since then, which is unfortunate because the rest of the world has, but invariably the way that the Electoral College system is set up today is set up to potentially preference one party over another, and the way that it gets gerrymandered, particularly around the disenfranchisement and the dismantling of election what do you call it, voting booths and et cetera. It all adds to whomever is the incumbent, whomever has had the opportunity to change things last little bit in order to make things preference them getting re-elected, that is who is going to benefit from it. But either way, it is a broken system.
Well, is it? I mean, would you be saying that though? I suppose if the Democrats were in, if you had
Yes.
the party.
Oh
of
no!
your,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is broken. I used to think I love the Americans. You don't vote. Yet the more I've read into it, I'm like, no, I hate the American system. I'm so happy that we have such a simple simple voting system in comparison to the United States. I'm not a huge fan of mandatory voting or mandatory turning up.
Yeah.
But I didn't vote in my 20s because of that. But then I realized, actually, you know what? My vote really, really counts. And then I just started and I voted in every local and federal election since.
Yeah.
We have a simpler system compared to the broken thing. Whatever you call that in the United States, it's just whatever it is. It's broken.
Okay. Well, that's
in my opinion, the one argument for the retention of the Electoral College system is that it is inherently suspenseful, right from beginning to end, because you can win the popular vote in a state and potentially not get the Electoral College votes from that state. I mean, how suspenseful is that? I won the state. Yes. No. That doesn't mean you've won.
no.
Well, I mean, Hillary Clinton, 3 million more votes than Donald Trump, and still lost.
And Bush. I mean, don't you can't.
Yeah. And that's what they suspect. They think that Biden will win by a far larger margin in the popular vote than Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
Doesn't mean he's going to become president.
No, well, he's just done some further gerrymandering, if you like, in the Supreme Court in order to bolster his efforts. There was a really interesting finding by Justice Kavanaugh in this last week around the duration that people are going to, or that the American people are going to be able to allow for votes, for postal ballot votes in Wisconsin to remain valid past the election day. And essentially they said, look, I'm an originalist, right? If the votes were not here on the first Tuesday of the 11th month of the third year, There is no way that the originalists who would have taken, 6 weeks to actually travel to their local voting station, there is no way that they would have accepted the same thing. It's just broken. It's broken, Greg. It's broken.
Also, nice segue into our second topic. I like that.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
But also, places like North Carolina are allowing post. So it's just another example of a broken system. Ollie, do you want to talk more about the voting? I've completely lost my train of thought. Oh my God!
I'll jump in right there.
Continue without me. I completely lost the question I was going to ask.
I think there's a really important distinction to be made at the beginning of the conversation, which is there are state-by-state rulings, and the Supreme Court is a federal body making decisions about, generally speaking, decisions that have already been made in state Supreme Courts about state voting matters. There are things that the Supreme Court can and can't adjudicate on, but they can also make distinctions from one state to the next.
Okay.
So there will be states where the same ballot would count, and there will be states where the same ballot won't count, which is incredible to me in a federal election, that you have a vote cast in the same manner. It's on this, a piece of paper. It was dropped in a box with a postage stamp on it. It was dated and whatever else, and it arrived in the ballot counter's hands in the same minute. One will count and one won't, and yet they're for the exact same office. This is the sort of system that we're talking about. It's extremely difficult to navigate, and when it really becomes a point of high contention internationally, I suppose, is when you have instances like Bush v. Gore, and it's one state that's deciding the election, and it's incredibly marginal, and there are all sorts of different machinations that take place trying to benefit one party or the other. And there's a lot of talk this election cycle about the role that the Supreme Court will play, particularly in the context of Donald Trump's third addition to the Supreme Court, Amy Coney Barrett. Now, she hasn't started weighing into these decisions yet. She's only just joined the court, so you won't see decisions from her immediately because she'll need to be involved in cases more or less from the start in order to provide opinions. But that's coming, and that's Jake mentioned the originalists. These are people that generally
that was going to be my question about originalists. Yes, thank you. Yep.
Is generally speaking, they interpret the Constitution in a way that they believe is what was originally intended. And of course, what was originally intended was intended in the 1770s. And the world has moved on in more ways than we could enumerate in 1,000 episodes. So there are risks there. And we've certainly seen that, but I think we're going to see a lot of patchy decision making. And I think either way, it would be really nice to just see a really clear-cut result. The idea of another 3 months of litigation is just, and the Americans really love to litigate in elections. We're seeing that in full bottle here. There was a decision in Michigan where they ruled that you couldn't provide paid transport to get people to the polls. So, for example, if you were disabled and there was an organization prepared to come and collect you and take you to the polls, no, can't do that.
It's insane.
And you think to yourself, this is complete madness. Why is that against the rules? But for some reason or another, there is a legal decision that says no.
But the reason for that is it could be considered coercion. Yeah, like I get, there are plenty of arguments for and against this, but it is one of those things because of the way that the voting system has been set up, and because of the the persistent gerrymandering that's gone on, and the disenfranchisement, particularly the dismantling of acceptable polling locations across each of the states. The way that parties secure the vote, the way that they get, a good idea of how many votes they're going to get, is they register people to get on a Democrat-controlled bus or a controlled bus so that they can get on that bus and get to the voting station and pass on coronavirus and not know about it for 14 days. So it's look, that's the way that it happens. So there are arguments for and against that. You are essentially, in one way or another, the party is paying for that person's vote. Invariably, they are. From a reductionist argument, they are paying for that person's vote.
And yet, as a sort of counterposition to that, we've seen the courts rule that you are allowed to stand outside polling stations holding military spec rifles.
Oh, thank
goodness. That's okay.
Yeah.
But in other instances, we see things where you can't offer to drive people who can't otherwise get themselves to polling stations. And so it's really difficult, I think, for people in our Australian context to imagine this degree of shambles, that there can be so many different decisions made in so many different states, that the same vote can be treated in completely different ways in different places, is astonishing. I mean, you take Nebraska and Maine split their electoral college votes. So they have electoral college votes awarded to the statewide vote, and they have electoral college votes awarded according to congressional districts, whereas the other 48 states apportion all of their votes statewide. And then there are other areas which aren't states which also get to contribute electoral votes to this election. It is the complexities of this election are staggering. I know I get mocked for saying the word staggering all the time, but they are staggering.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more in that sense, because it's tremendously confusing. And not only that, when I'm watching the news with my wife, and we'll hear Donald Trump say certain things, and it's normalized to a certain extent these days. Mm-hmm. But a thought experiment that we like to do is go, imagine Scott Morrison getting up and saying, this election will be filled with fraud, that mail-in votes just that Labor are just looking to steal the election, that they're going to that they're going to use the courts to steal the election. And it's just like, imagine him saying that. Imagine if that was the level of acceptance that we had for the conversation about our elections. And it sort of throws you back a little bit and sort of gives you a step back into and looking at it from a different angle, because it is just so normalized. Like he's done Donald Trump has done such a good job of making us numb to him saying these things over and over and over again. And you see him doing those sorts of things with coronavirus now. And like you say, imagine if we had that complexity to our electoral system and you just didn't understand it at all.
It's a little wonder that it's really difficult. Sorry to interrupt everybody at once. It's really I think it's very understandable that there are so many. There's such a feeling of a lack of legitimacy in these elections when they can be decided by such flimsy or otherwise flip-flopping rules, rules that apply in one state and not another, or decisions that are made by a court after the election about how votes cast before that decision was made will be treated. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane. And one of the things we've spoken about before when we did this episode last time, this crossover episode, was talking about how, my question was, why is American politics so influential here? Why do we care so much? I think my comment was about the fact that Daniel Andrews actually got bumped one day so that ABC News could host the debate. Sorry, not host. Display the debate. Show the debate. It's almost a glimpse into the future, though, isn't it? It's almost a glimpse into what not to do.
Just jumping back to talk about Trump, that's the power of his ability to gaslight, and apparently in an entire nation, is that it's just this barrage of constant BS that just numbs people. So it does become normalized. Absolutely. What I'm worried about, and this will be completely jumping off topic for a second, but what I worry about is taking that kind of rhetoric, that kind of just lies, that kind of embracing of conspiracy theories, and then adding in technology that is that can sort of mimic anybody's voice, anybody's image, and then just creating all this fake content, which is just a further blurring of those lines, a further graying of that area. Because you have to understand, it's not Donald Trump is not really wanting to win over everybody. He's just trying to blur the factual information enough that people become disengaged or apathetic. And he has so many little bits that his supporters can cherry pick along the way that goes, yep, Donald Trump was right. That's absolutely true. One fact versus, I think he was averaging like 100 bits of misinformation or lies per day recently. I think that's so somewhere between 50 to 100. That's a huge amount of lying for one person to do. And the president of the United States, who has such a large platform, every news organization is covering. So he not only has this ability to gaslight anybody who's in the room, but then that's amplified by not only his propaganda outlets like Fox News, but the news in general.
Yeah.
And that's why you become so desensitized to it that you just disengage and go, whatever, that's just Donald. And it's actually really damaging.
You're totally right. And so this is the interesting thing, though. Like, Donald Trump consistently contradicts himself. Anything that there is a particular clear statement on that he has made, there is quite often an opposing statement on that same issue that he has made, which for him is fantastic because he is always right about every issue.
Yeah.
But I think
that's the strategy. That's the method of the madness.
The other thing here is, and I really like the way that you framed that, Gareth. The other thing to
that's
mention
2 points
here,
to Gareth, by the way, Ollie. That's
is that
you lost one for staggering, so you're at -1.
No more staggering. Speaking of staggering, you may have staggered my the point that I was going to make. Not that it was ever going to be particularly great, but this is an interesting thing about this president. He is a populist president, and he will often spout his policy as part of, it'll be the latter part of a particular tweet or the first part of a particular string of tweets. And we have history with prime ministers in Australia. John Howard was someone who liked to drop a bomb. Drop a bomb. He'd often use News Corp. He'd go and have a doorstop interview, or essentially to and accept the to essentially make its way into the zeitgeist, and everybody would opinion, and based on that opinion, and then he'd essentially step back. And wait for that conversation to play out. And then at the end of that conversation happening, he would come in with a new policy, or he would dump it all together, basically, depending on which way the river flowed, essentially. And that was masterful. You would say how John Howard did that. That is politically, strategically, that is a masterful way to run a populist government. On the other hand, you've got Trump, who, is so interesting this election because the Republicans, who have existed for a tremendous amount of time, who have been relatively consistent on their Republican platform, on the things matter to Republicans from election to election to election. There is a consistent core of principles that they will take to each election. This time, it is whatever Donald Trump says, and it is so interesting to have seen this dyed-in-the-wool political party. This political party who consistently has these core principles to completely dump those principles in favor of whatever that dude says. That was interesting. That is so interesting to watch.
It's a lot of that speaks to the 35 to 40% baked on supporters that are Donald Trump supporters. Yeah. Like, they're not Republican supporters, they're Donald Trump supporters.
Yeah.
So he has the power to really drag that whole party in line. And whatever the Don says, the Don gets in this particular case. Yeah, it's a shame that such a party with such a proud tradition, which, love them or hate them.
They're proud boys, is what you say.
Proud boys. Well, they are. Well, yeah, they are now. But it is a shame to see them give away so many of their values simply because they've fallen behind this one particular person. Yeah.
All right, Ollie, I reckon it's your time to shine. What do you think?
Time to talk about. Well, before we go to Ollie, and I recognise for a while. I wouldn't mind just introducing a little bit of the Trump populism, because I love knickknacks, and I regularly introduce knickknacks to the pouch as we're recording, and I'd just love to introduce two of the tremendous, you might say, bits of paraphernalia that I have for today's episode as mascots. So the first one I have is a Donald Trump bobblehead.
We can't see it, Jake, because of your
Oh,
background.
no.
Blue screen.
Okay,
Your
all
blue
right.
screen.
Put it in front of you.
Put it in front of your head.
Right in front of you.
Oh, there you go. Okay, good idea. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He's
there we
cool.
go.
Donald Trump bobblehead.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right. And the second one, possibly my favorite, Donald Trump toilet brush.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I saw some Donald Trump gear in the local news agency the other day, and I was like, that's so weird. Like that, I don't know whether that sort of stuff sells. Well, who's hawking that stuff anyway?
That's a great question.
All right. Can we trust the polls, Ollie?
Yes.
Okay, great. And that was a good talk. Love it. Can we trust the polls? So we had Hillary Clinton won the popular vote last time. She was ahead in all the polls. If I was a betting man, I would have put $1 billion down on Hillary Clinton to win the last election. There was no way that she could win. These days, I just don't care. I don't care what the polls say, because should I care? Should I actually be paying attention to the polls this time around? Was it just my misinterpretation of the polls? Is it my fault?
I'd love to be able to blame you for the 2016 election,
Sure.
Greg, but
I can wear it. I've got my blazer
yeah.
on. I can wear anything today.
excellent. No, I don't think that that's fair. I don't think it's fair to blame you. And look, I think generally speaking, polls are pretty poorly understood by most people, just because it's sort of statistical nerdness of the first order. It's politics plus statistics. And I think it's pretty natural for the average person not to necessarily engage with these things at any huge degree of detail.
Yeah.
So
you're sort of hoping that the journalists do their job properly.
that's right.
Yeah.
And the pollsters as well. And look, the pollsters got it wrong, but they get it wrong every election. 2016 was quite unusual because it was the significance of how much they got it wrong, the degree by which they got it wrong in critical states. And so, and that swung the election. Clinton famously lost the election by about 80,000 votes. Hundreds of millions of votes are cast, and she lost by 80,000 in 3 key states. Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania were decided by a total of less than 80,000 votes. And had she won those states, which Obama won in the election prior, she would have won the presidency. Never mind all of the other states that she didn't win that she was otherwise predicted to do. There are lots of different ways in which this election is different from a polling perspective. I'll try and keep this brief. I know everyone's set me up for a fall here.
Oh, don't worry about it. I do a podcast with Jake. Don't bother with that.
So I guess there's
Feel weird.
One place to
I
start.
don't have the ability to edit him down either. Damn it.
No, you can't just erase the third of what I said. Hey, that's not where all the other things I say go. There are actually three significant elections going on. This is not just the presidential. There's also a Senate election and also a House of Reps election. And I think we can knock those off, because I don't think that's of huge interest to most of our listenership. The House of Reps is already controlled by the Democrats, and they are a greater than 99% chance to retain control there, and in fact probably pick up even more seats. The Senate is a more difficult proposition. It's probably going to be line ball. That's famously the state's house, and there being more Republican, traditionally more Republican states out there, it's a body politic that really lends itself to the Republican Party. So even in this big blue wave that we're in, very likely that the Democrats will only achieve a very marginal majority in the Senate. And to the presidential, we have to throw in the Electoral College, which we've touched on. But basically, each state has a number of Electoral College votes according to its population, roughly. And then those are the votes that actually decide the presidential. And this is how you end up in a situation where you can win the popular vote in the US by a huge margin and still lose the presidency. And you just touched on Clinton's almost 3 million vote advantage 4 years ago, where she also lost the election. Now, to the polling, there are a few things that went wrong in 2016. One of the things was that they failed to adjust, the pollsters failed to adjust for education. So the way that a poll is run usually is that they'll go out, they'll poll, say, a statistically significant number of people, say 1,000, and that'll have a particular margin of error in it, which is just a statistical calculation. And then they'll make adjustments. So if they go out and talk to 1,000 people, but 60% of them were men and 40% were women, they know that that's not what the electorate looks like. And so they'll make a statistical adjustment to say we need to reduce these demographic factors and make an adjustment the other way. They didn't do that for education, in a really huge way in these key states where those with non-college educations showed out in huge numbers all of a sudden and resulted in really big swings, 5% swings away from the polling average, which is huge. We haven't seen things like that since the 1940s. So that was a huge miss, and it was a huge miss in key states that swung, which sort of amplified the degree to which everybody's perspective of how badly wrong they got it was made. So this election, they're all saying, the pollsters are all saying, don't worry, we're now making adjustments for this.
Okay. So here's a question, Ollie.
Go.
What happens if the polls get it wrong again?
They're probably going to be out of money, I think.
Yeah, well, exactly right.
Well, it doesn't stop Donald Trump, does it? So it's not going to stop them.
Ironically, this year, people are paying a lot more money for a lot higher quality polls, because what happened in 2016 was there were a lot of assumptions made, and not anywhere near as much money was spent on the quality of the polling. And I think that came out in the result, that you pay for what you get to a large extent, and the quality of a really good poll versus the quality of a not good poll is the gap. That's the election, as they say.
And they want to keep viewers too, right? They want to keep people like me on board, because if they can boast that a particular newspaper or a particular polling group got the election right, we can say, well, let's trust them for the next election. So it's not just about this one here. They actually want to get it right for the sake of.
There's a reason why Ollie and I will go to 538 quite a lot. Is because they are so consistent in their accuracy when it comes to their polling, not just in politics, across a whole host of different areas.
Okay.
So they're very good. So 538.
So what are they saying? What are 538 saying about your Wisconsins, your Michigans, your Pennsylvanias?
I want to hear what 538 has on McConnell's Senate seat.
Actually, I don't know.
Sadly, it's not as close as we would like. But it's closer than it has been. Far more likely that Lindsey Graham is in the firing line. He's only about a 66% chance, I think, off the top of my head. And he was someone who flip-flopped enormously on Trump. He was very famous for saying Trump was some kind of kook in the course of the primaries.
But he's our kook.
That's right. Within about a year of Trump being president, he rolled over completely, swung 180 degrees, and jumped on the Trump train. So
I watched that interview where he said that. He actually said also that being that Donald Trump is the nominee, it becomes a nominee, it'll mean that the Republican Party is broken. And it's like, well, your party's broken. But yeah, he's just 180 degrees. Talking about the importance of really good polls versus dodgy ones, I guess. When you're looking at battle states, it's like North Carolina, there's 2 points in it to Biden, 49 to 47. There's only one state which has Trump out ahead, and where is it? I've lost it. Ohio has 48 to 46 in Trump's favor. But then again, even the larger ones, Pennsylvania 51 to 45. You'd hope that's right. Because if that swings the other way, then no one will trust polling for that. That's it. Polling with the United States is done.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's a reasonable margin in pretty well all of the states. So within the margin of error, there's a lot of room. So thankfully, those polling companies will be sitting pretty. They can't really lose, thankfully, because of the controls that they put in place. I would say though, one poll that I've come to trust in the last few weeks was
The
on
pouch. The pouch. Whether people want a mug or a sticker.
Was on Fox News that said Trump voters are the most handsome people, and that's to me that stands out as the most influential poll of 2020.
2020.
That would explain why so many people yell at me, "You're an ugly leftist." There we go.
Yeah, lefty comments, Gov.
All right. Okay. Let's get to the nitty gritty. Let's put our money where our mouths are. At the last NRL grand final between Melbourne Storm and between the other team, which was the Penrith Panthers, literally 20 minutes down the road. I gave my kids $5 each, and I said, "Look, you can place a bet just to make it a little more exciting because we're not a real big sporting family." So let me propose that to you, gentlemen. I give you $5 each to place a bet on whether Biden or Donald Trump will win. Who would you put your money on?
I want to hear Ollie first.
Biden. This is actually a very interesting question.
Because I know. It's on my interesting questions page.
Because there is a huge gap between betting odds and polling odds for this election, which is very unusual. Usually they track reasonably close to one another. But the way betting companies work is they take a margin between the money that's being bet in either direction. What we're seeing is there is huge money backing Donald Trump, which is completely divorced from the polling. So while the polling suggests about $1.10 or $1.11 to Biden, which is really low odds, what we're seeing in the betting markets is about $1.50, right. and that's a huge gap. And I don't know what we're seeing in the betting markets, but certainly the polling averages suggest that Biden's leading by about 8 points. And even if you adjust for the biases of the Electoral College, which benefit Republicans at the moment, a 3 or 4% swing, accounting for that advantage, you still end up with a Biden win of 4%, which is really big. Well, in a US presidential.
Yeah, Sportsbet here in Australia, if I was to put $5 down on Joe Biden, they got $1.50 for Joe Biden and $2.75 for Donald Trump.
And realistically, Trump should be out near $5. If you're talking about the polling odds.
Yeah, right.
And this is very unusual for just elections anywhere to see such a break from the polling odds. And what we're talking about, where people don't believe the polls, I think is showing up in the betting odds. Anyway, so I'd put my $5 on Biden. I don't think that's going to shock anybody.
Okay.
Because I'd like my $5 back.
Okay. Yeah. So I think that Donald Trump is going to win. I also think that Joe Biden is going to win. And I think that Kanye West is going to win. So I've hedged my bets every way possible. And I'm just going to edit out that little section and put it into the next podcast where I'm right. Look, as Ollie's pointed out, I mean, Real Clear Politics has Biden out by 8.5%. So 51.6 to 43.1. Even if that's statistically off by a little bit, that's still a huge lead 3 or 4 days out from the election. Coming into 2016, Hillary and Trump were 45-43 Clinton's way. So within the margin of error. So I think that you're looking at a Biden win. I think it'll be a much higher popular vote win. I think in the Electoral College, if he does win, I don't think it's going to be a landslide. I think it'll be roughly around about maybe 320, 340 Electoral College points. Like with out of the 538. Yeah, 38 is available. So I don't think it's going to be a landslide there, but I think it'll be a win. I do think the Dems are going to pick up more in the House. That's sort of a foregone conclusion. I think I'm really interested to see where the Senate lands. I think that the Senate will probably swing slightly towards the Democrats. Okay. Just when it comes to just the polling numbers, that's in favor of Biden. I think there's just enough emphasis behind Biden and the Democrats in general that it might swing the Senate back, which would be very interesting to see House, Senate, and White House controlled by the Democrats. Interesting to see what they do in the first 2 years. Stack the Supreme Court probably. But in short, sorry, that was a very long-winded answer. I think Biden's going to win.
Okay.
But I also think Trump's going to win. So, no, I think Biden.
So $5 for Biden.
$5
with,
Biden.
with Ollie, $5 for Gareth. Jake?
Greg? Oh, no, I want to hear yours first. I want to go last.
I'm going Trump. Trump all the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going Trump too.
Okay.
Oh,
It really is.
I like
It really is
long
politics.
I like long odds. I also this is such an interesting thing. It's such an interesting thing according to me. So I feel that there is an undercurrent here that is being created in terms of social tension that may or may not cause people who would not have voted, who would like to be those silent millions who would not normally vote but have been polarized by the various things that have occurred over the last few years, who have generally agreed with the things that both President Trump has said and both Biden has said, sort of they're streaming along middle of the pack. Just the mere fact that Trump is the incumbent, I think for those millions of people who have never, may not have ever voted before, may not have ever been polled before, I think they're going to make a difference. And also, I think we're underestimating the number of people who just get general entertainment out of Trump. And I think there's a lot of people who don't want to have to wake up on Wednesday morning and not know what to do with their time when they the first thing that they do every morning is check Twitter to see what world leader Trump is alienating the US against, and what are they going to do with that time?
The boredom vote, Jake.
Exactly. The anti-boredom vote.
Yeah.
Really.
I'll counter that with the return of the black vote. The black vote was historically down in 2016, and a lot of that had to do with the Russian disinformation campaign that was all throughout that election. A lot of that disinformation was aimed at not turning people towards Trump, but just making people not turn up. 4 years later, there's a lot more people that are a lot more savvy towards that, and they are going to vote no matter what. There are some people who are traveling 10 hours just to vote, getting on planes to vote. I think Donald Trump has invigorated the voting community, those who will vote, to a level that I don't think will be ever seen. I mean, it's something like we'll ever see for a long time. I think it's something like 90 million people have already voted, something like that. That's a huge amount of people to do early voting. People are driven on both sides, definitely. But I think you'll find that a lot of the black vote that didn't turn up in 2016 are going to turn up in 2020. Now, that's not to say they're all going to go Biden's way. There's definitely a large contingency of the Hispanic vote that are for Trump, especially down in Florida. So, look, if I think Biden will win. If Trump wins, I would not be surprised at all. Absolutely.
Nice way to hedge your bets there.
No. I think Biden. I'm not hedging.
He's got $5 down on Biden. There's no going back.
Biden, but if Trump did pull out a victory, it wouldn't surprise me at all. It just wouldn't. Considering, I mean, like Iowa is 1 point. Between the two. Florida is 2 points. That's what 29 electoral college votes. It can swing very easily one way or the other. But yeah. So I guess our reputations are on the line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Considering that Ollie and I are consistently wrong when it comes to our predictions.
That's fine.
We record it. It's there for all eternity. The internet never forgets. Garrett's raised a really interesting point there about the black vote, the minority votes. And we talk a lot about Latino votes, Latinx votes, and black votes and so on. And that they are causing demographic changes across the US, and slowly but surely, the deep south even, there are these states that are turning from red to quote unquote purple.
I know where he's going with this one.
One of the things that will come up in this election is that Donald Trump will have made gains among black and Latinx voters since 2016. So he will actually improve his performance among those voter groups for a range of reasons that I won't go into here. But when the turnout amongst those groups goes up as much as we're expecting to see it, it's still a false narrative, because the overall effect of, say, going from drawing a random number out of the sky, going from 100 voters to 200 voters, even if you perform 5% better there, if the majority of that voting block still votes for the other person, you're still losing overall. So your overall movement is still in the wrong direction. I don't know if I've explained that very well, but there are a lot of sort of false flag narratives that don't stand up to the statistical analysis. But they're very interesting. So there's a lot of people, a lot of Latinx voters in Florida who are from Venezuela and Cuba, or are descended from people from those jurisdictions, who are wildly opposed to anyone perceived as a leftist or a socialist and whatever else, and will vote for Trump simply because he went after the administration, the regime in Venezuela, and because he has a hard-nosed policy on Cuba. These are the sort of deciding vote things. And Reagan very famously said, Latinos are Republicans, they just don't know it yet. And there's a lot of truth to that, because they are, and I'm speaking in horrible generalizations here, they are a generally conservative voting bloc. They are a Catholic group. They're very self-determinant, and they are, much like most migrants, historically conservative. And so the Republicans have kind of alienated a voting bloc that probably should otherwise have been theirs, and maybe theirs in the future, simply by virtue of their rhetoric about migrants from the South and from Latin America and the war on drugs and so on. So I'm fascinated by that part of US politics. And again, then there's the divide amongst the genders. So Latinx and black voters, women are far more likely to vote Democrat than the same race groups on the male side, who are far more likely, well, not more likely relative to women, more likely to vote Republican. So there's so many traps here in talking about large voting groups in the US. And what I want to conclude with on that little diatribe, perhaps, is that Biden is going to win this election because he's going to do much better amongst white voters in the suburbs. And that is going to be the big swing away from Donald Trump from a demographic perspective, is that he will draw on older, whiter voters in urban and suburban areas. And that's what's going to decide this election, particularly in places like Pennsylvania and Florida and Ohio. That's my prediction.
I also think there's the Uncle Joe Biden thing, as I was talking about earlier. He's calmer. He's a lot more rational in his approach. He's a lot more empathetic in his approach. And I think in times of chaos, people naturally gravitate toward that kind of persona. Trump
Counterpoint, he's boring.
Doesn't matter. No.
That's exactly it.
No, that's not the counterpoint. In this moment, boring is better. In comparison to the chaos of Donald Trump, in comparison to the chaos of 2020, of the pandemic, of everything, I think boring is probably better.
Yeah, it's basically Joe Biden's. It's basically Joe Biden's campaign phrase at this stage, isn't it?
Yeah. Can you imagine waking up? So the counterpoint to the other thing of people going, I want to wake up and see what what Donald Trump has written on Twitter. There's so many in the electorate to be like, I want to wake up and not read what Donald Trump wrote on Twitter. I want to see who he hasn't alienated this point at this time. I want to see which like Joe Biden will never come up with some kind of garbage nickname that is meant to be an insult. Like, it just wouldn't happen. So, yeah.
All right.
I think I've successfely hedged my bets either way. So.
I think just to segue into something I want to talk about, which is we talked a little bit, and I think you guys have all done a decent job of coming up with the reasons why people vote for Donald Trump. We've had 4 years of trying to figure that out, and I think thoughtful people have spent some time in that space, right? To figure that out. Now I've got 15 reasons written on my book here for reasons why people might vote for Donald Trump. They're well researched. You can bet your bottom dollar on that. So I wanted to start by getting you guys to we'll just do one round each of choosing a number between 1 and 15. I'll give you the reason, and you can try and counter it. Are you ready for that sort of heavy lifting, boys?
I've just seen Jake's water bottle. That is by very definition heavy lifting.
A soda stream.
Wow.
Okay. Not a plug.
Jake, do you want to play as well?
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well, let's start with Gareth then. Gareth, between 1 and 15.
I'm number one. Let's go 0.6.
I didn't number them. So 1, 2. Okay. Pro-life policy. So Donald Trump has led quite conservatively, and has enough people around him, particularly on the court, I think is my notes here, about leading with a pro-life policy that doesn't allow abortion. Go.
That doesn't allow abortion.
Well, I don't know whether it allows abortion or not. I don't know. He's going. He's
He
very pro-life. He's very anti-abortion. He's very much led in that direction.
He platformed in 2016 as pro-abortion.
Yeah.
He picked Amy Coney Barrett, who is famously anti-abortion in many of her opinions, and personal opinions as well. Yeah, look, it is essential for him to platform that way because it gets the right-wing Christian vote. I think that I don't think Roe v. Wade is going to fall, but I think that a lot more powers are going to return to the states where they will limit abortion quite considerably. And that worries me greatly because limited abortion equals more deaths. That's just how it is. So if Trump gets in and he doesn't have to run for a third term, I mean, no president does, but if he gets in and he's no re-election issues hanging over his head, he's going to go full Trump. He's going to go full into every agenda, every right-wing political agenda that he can come up with. And one of those will be trying to limit as much as possible Roe v. Wade. So I think there is a lot of people around him, especially if they hold the Senate. And if he comes to just say that he comes away from this election with a sizable win, and he establishes himself a mandate, he's going to go full ball into all those policies that he wants. So I think there's enough people around him that could facilitate the changes that he wants. Yeah, come after this election if he wins.
Okay. All right. Ollie, you ready?
Okay.
Go. You got to give me a number.
0.3.
1, 2, 3. All right. Jobs. So the lowest unemployment lowest unemployment rate in half a century under Donald Trump. He's created 7 million new jobs, including more than 500,000 in the manufacturing sector. Throughout that time, nearly 6.6 million Americans were lifted out of poverty, including nearly 2.8 million children.
And you'd like me to address that point? Okay.
Well, yeah. So that's why I would vote for Trump.
Refute it.
Refute it. I think that's the best argument there is for voting for Trump is his economy record. And I think that he has failed to listen to his advisors. And he said this on stage the other day, that he's getting phone calls, I mean, this is his language, from his advisors saying, stop talking about Hunter Biden's laptop and start talking about your economic record. Because this is an area where, and it's quite unique among areas polled among American or likely American voters, where they rate Donald Trump more highly than Joe Biden in terms of managing the presidency. The economy, he outperforms Biden. He outperforms Biden on almost nothing. And this is one of those points where he has a record that is positive. Now, I would also argue that he inherited it from the Obama administration, and that he actually created fewer jobs in the time that he was in office than Obama did, given the same period of time, or holding for the period of time. But that was his path to the election, to my mind, and he's been distracted by the points that won him the election last time, the screaming about Joe Biden's son's apparent laptop, for which there's very little really good evidence.
Lost in the mail.
Well, yeah. There's just a lot of these distractions, and he's gone back to the well. This is President Trump I'm talking about. He's gone back to the well of topics that won him the election in 2016 in that sort of gut feeling politics that he runs. And I can't hold it against him for doing that because it worked last time. I think the problem he has here is there is a 4 years of Trump administration legacy, which puts all of the personal attacks on the Biden camp into context. So Gareth mentioned nepotism before. Well, it doesn't work when you fill the administration with your children and so on, and then you point the finger at the other side and say, but he had a laptop. Well, it doesn't stand up. If you all of the personal attacks that he can level, he spent 4 years advertising the fact that he is worse in all of those ways. And when you're dealing with marginal voters, the ones who are actually going to change their minds, much better off to talk to the economy. I mean, notwithstanding the fact this year has been a disaster. Economy. Talk about the economy.
Okay. All right. Well, that's interesting. Okay. So it's good that you're at a point, I suppose, where you can say, look, it's actually a pretty strong argument for voting for Donald Trump. It's interesting also that you mentioned about, that there might be a little bit of a play on words, a little bit of play with the numbers there as well, considering what he's inherited from Obama.
He's also dismantled opportunities for future jobs as well by antagonizing the major trading partners, particularly China. Whole sectors have had to reevaluate who they're sending the goods that they've created to.
Well, it's actually reason number 13, Jake.
I was going to say I want 12.
Is the crackdown on China? Number 12. All right. Now this, I'm a little bit out of my depth here, so I might just mention it.
I can make up stuff.
Yeah, and then I'll hand it over to you three. This is the brokering of the first meaningful peace deal in 3 years in the Middle East, also including in that moving the American embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. So lots of positive action in the Middle East from Donald Trump, including no new wars. The first president to not create any new wars in a certain amount of time. I did have it written down here.
And want to try.
But the continuation of others. So
in 20 or 30 years or something like that. No new wars, brokered first meaningful peace deals in the Middle East, and moving the American embassy. So lots of positivity in the Middle East. Go.
It's an interesting one because I actually kind of wanted to take the opposite and double down on your point. But it's such a fraught thing because a meaningful peace deal. The whole premise of a meaningful peace deal, meaningful to whom? Certainly meaningful to the Israelis, and they definitely deserve peace, but so do the other parties in the conflicts that exist around there, Palestine, etc. And I would also say that he you might say is brokered peace, but he did it in the most antagonistic way possible by moving the U.S. consulate to Jerusalem, which all but essentially it was a highly political move to do so. So yeah, look, very, very interesting to refer to what he's done as brokering a peace deal. I think he's done everything in his power to antagonize, world leaders such as Kim Jong-un. There was the love fest that occurred, but prior to the love fest, there was a whole bunch of really serious antagonism. There was Iran. One of the first acts that he did as president was to pull out of the Iran deal to denuclearize.
That's number 7, Jake.
Denuclearize.
You've gone out of your lane. The Iran deal is number 7.
The premise of it's still
play by the rules, Jake.
Follow the rules that are arbitrary and made up on the spot. It's great. It's great that we quote have peace in the Middle East, but I would question that premise of peace according to whom, because rockets are still flying, in both directions. People are still dying. The Palestinians are still an oppressed minority on their own lands. So peace according to whom, Greg? According to whom?
What do you boys think about that one?
Government.
Well, I don't really buy into the narrative that Trump has solved any problems in the Middle East. I think the assassination of the Iranian intelligence operative was a really risky thing to do, and I think that you will continue to see Iranian reticence to that for some time, and there's a suggestion that a lot of the actions the Iranians have taken in influencing the 2020 election have been born out of their anger for that assassination. And
what did they do?
They killed a general.
No, I know that bit. What did the Iranians do?
The Iranians are doing.
Sorry, you go, Ollie.
I was going to say they're doing much the same thing as the Russians did in 2016, and in fact, there's a suggestion that they're sharing their intel and their hacking access between the Russians and the Iranians. And this is from U.S. intelligence services.
Right.
This isn't the New York Post or something. This is the CIA, etc. understand that this is happening. This has been reported by the agencies themselves that the Iranians and Russians are influencing the 2020 election already, using hacked information, using data roll information, and so on. And the speculation is that the Iranians have been seriously motivated by not only the Trump administration's constraints on their economy, which have been utterly crippling, and I'm not saying I disagree with them, but they've been utterly crippling, but also this assassination of basically the number 2 guy in the Iranian administration. He was a long-time operative with huge connections across the Middle East, and basically masterminded Iran's position in the Middle East.
And also within the context of the US election, how many people are going to care about peace in the Middle East? How many people are going to care that, about Jerusalem? That's it. When you look at sort of the pandemic, when you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, when you look at unemployment, it will register with such a small part of the voting demographic that it's just not an issue coming into 2020.
A lot of the people that are going to care about, things like peace in Israel specifically are going to be those dyed-in-the-wool, hyper-Christian Republicans who do care about, securing the Holy Land.
But they're the people who would already vote for Trump
That's
anyway.
entirely
they're
true.
dyed in the
Agree.
Yeah.
Qasem Soleimani, sorry, I kept calling him the Iranian.
General, yeah, that's all right. I wasn't sure if we were naming him or not. I thought.
No,
I just couldn't remember off the top of my head.
That's all right. No, it happens all the time. All right. Well, I think we've tackled that pretty well, gentlemen.
Are there?
Yeah,
nominated
Greg?
your own point.
Oh.
Can we nominate one
That's
for
because
you?
I'm not intelligent
right.
enough.
Let's
I wouldn't have a
Greg,
clue.
Point number 2.
I have to. You can't do that to me.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, see, I have no idea. That's cut regulation. He cut regulation, reduced man hours on regulation in government. So there's a lot less bureaucracy under Donald Trump than there was anyway. I would presume that that's because there's a lot less people working in the White House than there has been under anyone else.
That's right. The State Department is now empty. There's one bloke with a pen and paper and nobody else.
So I'm just doing a whole bunch of overtime.
Do me and a piece of tumbleweed. The coronavirus is doing a better job than leading than anyone else. I don't. I'm not intelligent enough to be able to refute that. So I just have a list of reasons why people. There was also crushed ISIS. Cut taxes, originalist judges. We sort of touched on that a little bit. Interpretations of the Constitution. What else have I got here? Crackdown on China in unparalleled ways. Resisting the urge for the states to control the states during the pandemic, which I think is an interesting one. And putting back due process into universities as well. I've got.
I'll tell you the crackdown on China is one thing that I would be very comfortable doubling down on, because it is one of those things that invariably, unless you're Australia, most other in fact, all other countries. Australia is the only country that has a trade surplus with China, and that's even after you factor in the exports that have reduced post Australia's decision to essentially admonish the Chinese for their handling of the coronavirus. In our push for an inquiry. This is one of those things. There had to be someone had to stand up and say, if you're going to participate on the world stage as a globalist country, we need to participate on a level playing field. There needs to be a bit of, if you like, quid pro quo. Which he found elsewhere, but this is one of those things that that needed to happen. In my opinion, that needed to happen. Somebody needed to stand up. Somebody with enough of an economic backing. Somebody who was suffering at home, and thus, if one industry or another happened to be crippled because the Chinese decided that they would react poorly, might be able to just set up a new manufacturing sector for that industry in their own country. Somebody needed to stand up and say, we're all going to participate on a level playing field. And the fact that it came from a president who was, reasonably nationalist, or at least had, reasonably nationalist and protectionist principles in mind. Doesn't matter. Somebody needed to do it. He did it. And I would suggest that it's a reasonably good thing. Wouldn't agree to, the way that he necessarily went about it. Don't at all like the rhetoric that went around it. Think that it's really been obnoxious, the toing and froing. This week we love President Xi. Next week we frickin' hate him, and he's the worst thing in the world. It's been really, really weird and wonky, but invariably someone, I think, had to stand up and suggest that China start playing on a level playing field, for the rest of the world.
All right. If anyone has anything to say about that, I am going to need to go to the bathroom. So we either need to wrap up or I'm just going to duck out for 2 seconds. Gareth, you make the call.
Let's keep on chatting. I'm having a good time.
Yeah.
You can duck. Go on. Do your thing. Go on.
Maybe
all right.
mute.
In that particular case, let's something that wasn't on the run sheet. Black Lives Matter. I mean,
do.
Yeah, they very much do. One of the things that I think have been underreported with the Black Lives Matter movement is that they no doubt have contributed to the spread of coronavirus around the country. Like massive protests all around. Like they're wearing masks, sure. But that many people congregated in that many cities no doubt has contributed to it. I think I was listening to a really interesting podcast on I think it was actually a 538 podcast. They were talking about the underreported news items of this year in general, and especially this election cycle. And that got me thinking about what was underreported, and definitely that element of the Black Lives Matter movement, absolutely an essential movement. Absolutely. It's springing up from George Floyd's death. It became such an important part of American history, and it has been an agent of change in so many good ways. I think that their defund the policing slogan is a little bit limited because it's so easily co-opted into being an anti-police message. But actually, just a general question is, what do we think about the Black Lives Matter and their role in the pandemic this year?
We had a lot of conversations on the pouch about the sympathetic protests that occurred in Australia, I tried very hard to be extremely for the protests, acknowledging the necessary nature, as well as sort of being the strategy guy, knowing that you need to capitalize on as much as possible. There's as awful as it is, and I'll acknowledge the awful nature of what I'm about to say. The nature of tragedy is that there is that quote, "Never waste a tragedy," and invariably there was a lot of tragedy going on over a lot of years, and so the premise that people capitalized on both the timing, the nature of the occurrences as well, was important. I suppose both Greg and I took the opinion that while it was such a necessary thing, it also was a very extraordinarily risky thing to protest. And you highlight that premise of it really doesn't matter how many masks you put on, how well you social distance, how well you organize. Invariably, if you're going to go out and protest in large crowds, you are providing an opportunity for a virus that is extraordinarily good at spreading already.
Yeah.
You're providing a tremendous opportunity to do that, and when you couple that with the inherent risk unfortunately, the virus has gone really well in communities that are from, that suffer from low socioeconomic status. Unfortunately, people from those types of areas have poorer health outcomes, have generally poorer health as a starting point, quite often have poor nutrition as well. It's such an full breeding ground for a virus like this, which is highly opportunistic. But at the same time, you can't discount the fact that these were a lot of people who were hurting a lot, and had invariably a lot of right to stand up for what I would suggest is probably one of the most important principles that there is, which is I matter, I matter in my community, I matter in this society, and I matter in this country. And you will acknowledge that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Do I agree or disagree?
You do agree.
Okay, yeah,
You do agree.
absolutely.
It raises an interesting point, that topic of the Black Lives Matter movement, which is the points that Greg had for arguments in favor of voting for Donald Trump. There are a lot of arguments or a lot of issues, a lot of points of contention that are normative. You are adopting a value position, and it's really difficult to make a sort of an a priori or strictly rational counter argument, because it's just your own personal values that will decide where you sit on an issue, provided you aren't somehow chronically misinformed about the issue. So in this instance of your right to protest versus the authorities' power to compel you not to turn out in public during a pandemic is a balancing act, and there are good arguments to be made from a public health perspective. And then there's the sort of counter arguments to be made from a mental health position, but also for the people in the movement. They were, broadly speaking, the people statistically more likely to suffer as a result of having contracted COVID-19. We've seen the stats in the US which show it is minorities who are far more likely to die from COVID-19 than white people, basically. I mean, and then there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that's a socioeconomic outcome, as Jake was saying. So if you are in one of these minorities and you finally found some mass momentum among people who aren't in the minority, you're getting support from other groups, do you not accept that momentum? How do you keep that momentum going to protect you and the people that you care about into the future in the context of a pandemic? Do you keep marching? Do you keep taking that risk for yourself and for all of the other people who might suffer as a result, or do you not? I have no idea. I don't necessarily have a position on that because I think I come from a place of such absurd privilege as to make my position on that ridiculous. So yeah. I wouldn't. I guess my point there is that there are normative things, and there are things which you can demonstrate that there is almost no reason for standing against, and so much of what will decide the election are things where it's just an emotive call. These are your morals, your values, your ethics, and it's not for anybody else to say that you shouldn't, or they can make arguments for it, but they're not necessarily rational arguments.
That's what Ollie and I always talk about, is that we're two white guys talking about issues that really don't affect us. We don't suffer the same systemic, racism that a lot of other groups do. We're two guys. We don't suffer the prejudice that women do, or whatever group you want to pick. So we have to be very careful that when we're talking about these subjects, that we don't overlap our experiences in the world with somebody else's, because that trigger point of, George Floyd had the officer Shogun's kneeling on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That's horrible. He passed out. There's no way that man was subduing that person beyond a point of time. Like, he was unconscious. And even when the medics came and said, take your knee off, it took him like another 30 seconds for him to actually get to remove his knee. Like, whatever his motivation was, it was not just to subdue, it was to punish. And when you are part of a group that has literally hundreds and hundreds of years of that every single day, just this color of your skin is going to open you up to prejudice just by walking down the street. It's going to affect if you're going to be employed. You're going to be suspicious. You walk into a milk bar and someone's going to look at you suspiciously just because of the color of your skin. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that feels like. Like, I just don't know what that feels like. So I can't talk to their experience, and I have to sit back and just look at it as open-minded as possible.
Fair enough.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more.
Sounds good. That sounds good. I came in halfway through that one, but I sort of got the gist of that one. All right, gentlemen. Well, what would you like to do? I probably have to wrap up at some point. in the near future.
Sure. We're
We're
we're at an hour and a half, so I mean that's pretty decent. So
Yeah. All right. Well, look, thank you so much, guys, for having a chat with us today and for inviting us on and for being the instigators of that. It'll be great to have some commentary after Wednesday, I think, our time, isn't it? If my moon calendar is correct, Wednesday our time.
Wednesday morning. They'll start bringing in the counts.
Yeah, so it'll be fascinating to watch that unfold. It'll be fascinating to see the commentary afterwards, and it'll be fascinating to see, more importantly, the actions as a result of either outcome and how that works out. It is possible that things might turn out as bad as what some people think, and it is possible that some things might not turn out as bad as some people think. So I think that's what makes this one particularly interesting. Just as a side comment, we do have a commenter on Facebook, on YouTube, sorry. His name is Idiot Box. He's just on the Black Lives Matter discussion. He said, I'll send you 300 links to footage from inside the Black Lives Matter protests, and you can get back to me with a decent count on people not wearing masks or breaking physical distancing guidelines. He's saying that the comments about it spreading were invalid, that
I'd be very interested to see that. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
So 300, make it 200 links, Idiot Box. You know, we're busy.
Go the full 300.
Well, I'll be satisfied too. I don't have an opinion either way on this one, by the way, Idiot Box. But interesting that one. And he also said your Fox News experience doesn't count, which is odd. I don't think any of us watch Fox News, but that's all right.
What's that Fox News experience?
I don't know. I don't know what my Fox News experience is. I don't have one really. Anyway, just wanted to bring that up so that he knew that we weren't, or she knew that we weren't ignoring them.
Bots.
Oh, thank you for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Idiot Box. All right, well, yeah, but thank you guys, and please check out Politics Over Coffee for very calm and rational and well thought out discussion. For the other side of the coin, check out the Pouch the podcast, it is well thought out. Check out the Pouch podcast. The boys at Politics Over Coffee deal with Australian politics and worldwide politics as well. They're covering the US election. They have US election specials, all sorts of things there. The Pouch the podcast deals with Australian news and politics, not.
So seriously.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I was reading about a really strong bug.
Oh. Is this that bug they're using in the universities?
It is, yeah. It's
the amazing destruction bug or something it's called?
Yeah. Diabolical ironclad beetle.
That's it. Well, glad to see you're engaged in the discussion, Jake.
Well,
I was just, I was
way to bring it to an end.
You were doing the outro. I didn't know I was going to be called to.
You're always called to, Jake. It's part of the thing. Boys, where can people find Politics Over Coffee? What's the best thing for them to do?
politicsovercoffee.com. You'll find us on Spotify, Apple, iPod, Music, iCut, whatever the hell it's called now. SoundCloud, Stitcher, wherever you find good quality podcasts, you'll find Politics Over Coffee.
.com.
There's the plug. Look at that. There we go. Actually, I'm just going to plug. Ollie and I are going to sit down Wednesday night, I think it is, and we're going to do a mini podcast on the election results. So that'll be up Thursday. So
that's exciting. Are you going to live stream that one?
Well, no, we only live stream with you guys. So,
yeah.
Oh, we could live stream. Actually,
we could live stream it.
Live stream.
Maybe we'll wait and see if there are actually results on Wednesday night.
That's true. All right. Well, at some point,
or just do what Jordan Shanks does and do The Bachelor or something.
God. That's a signal that it's time to wrap up. We've gone to popular television.
Come to popular culture.
I forgot I was talking to a podcast with class then. Jake, if people want to check out the Pouch the podcast, what should they do or not do? What should they not do?
They should absolutely not look in my waste paper basket because they won't find anything of substance there. But what they should do is go to any
That's a clue to look in your waste paper basket, Jake, if ever I've heard one.
I want to know what's in your waste paper basket now. I want to know.
We're going to do a Wednesday live stream of what's in Jake's waste paper basket.
Donald Trump knickknacks that didn't make it to the podcast.
Otherwise known in Australia as a bin, Jake.
Yes, that's true. That's true. Sorry. I'll relabel it as bin. Look, I would love it if they found it within the cockles of their hearts to make their way to thepodcast.com. They can also go to patreon.com/Taylor Swift.
We nabbed
podcast.
it. We nabbed it.
It's
we didn't.
patreon.com/thepouch. The podcast, sorry, the full name, and of course you can go to any podcast player of choice and search for The Pouch, the podcast, and find us.
Absolutely, and that's it. I think we can wrap that up, boys. I got a second win because I went to the bathroom. So
very good, very good.
Yeah.
Can we let Ollie take us home as he always does at the end of each Politics Over Coffee?
Absolutely.
Oh, this is the bit that sounds so similar every time everyone thinks it's a recording. Well, here's me doing it live, proving it's not a recording. You ready? Thank you, everybody, very much for listening. We have, as always, had a great time recording. We'll see you again in another fortnight for another episode of Politics Over Coffee / The Pouch. See you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Was that a deep fake of... was that a deep fake of
There's
Gareth
enough
doing
audio
that?
of me doing that you could recreate it in any way you wanted.
you gotta do a Simpsons and try and change it up at least for one thing every
Just
outro.
to see if anyone's listening that far into the podcast.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I think there are when I was talking earlier about videos, with imagining Scott Morrison saying things that Donald Trump had said. I did actually stumble across a couple of videos of people acting like Obama. Saying the things that Donald Trump has said. So if you do want to step outside that box a little bit and check that out, Google something. I'm sure it will come up. All right. Well, thank you guys.
Something.
Yeah, Google something. It'll come up. All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for that outro, Ollie, and thank you, Gareth, and thank you, Jake.
Thanks, guys. That was awesome. That was a lot of fun.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you to my kids for not interrupting, or the dog for not interrupting. Thank you.
Thanks,
Namaste.
Banjo.
All right.